One-on-one with Ron Paul, outspoken advocate for limited government and personal liberty. What's behind his warning of a potential stock market crash worse than the one that led to the Great Depression? We'll find out on this edition of Politicking. Welcome to Politicking. I'm Larry King. Ron Paul is the former Republican U.S. Congressman from Texas. He made 3 bids for the White House, twice as a Republican, and in 1988 as the Libertarian Party's presidential nominee. He's the founder of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, and he's the host of the Ron Paul Liberty Report. He recently warned of a stock market meltdown, which he claims will be worse than the crash of 1929. Let's find out what's behind that warning. Ron joins us from Lake Jackson, Texas. What do you base the warning on, Ron?
Well, I base the warning on the fact that there's been a gross distortion in the marketplace due to our monetary policy. So if one understands how the monetary system affects the stock market, you can more or less spot, the bubbles and the distortions. We can't spot exactly when they crash, but we're probably in the early stages of it really coming down. But the big problem is that that central economic planning through the Federal Reserve doesn't work because it's designed mostly to protect big banks and big corporations and finance the military-industrial complex and the welfare state. And instead, it goes into different places and causes economic bubbles. The longer the bubble lasts and the lower the interest rates are, and this is what we've had zero rates and we've had all these QEs, so that is the inflation. The inflation isn't when you hear prices are going up. The inflation is when the Fed creates money out of thin air and distorts the market and drives the market and drives all this debt accumulation, and then you can spot this. And believe me, it is big, and it's the biggest probably in the history of the world because it's been going on for 10 years. Interest rates are essentially 0%, so the bubble is huge and it's bigger than anything the world has ever faced before.
But the Federal Reserve just raised the interest rate a quarter point. Isn't that going to help?
Not really. I think it's pretty irrelevant. But what we have to compare it to is what would the economy be like if you had wage and price controls on everything? It doesn't work very well. We've tried that, and not many economists, advocate that. And if you do that, you have a socialist economy, and that's why socialism always fails. There's no pricing structure. But when you price money, that is 1/2 of the entire economy. And that is just as detrimental to the economy as if you had wage and price controls on everything. So a quarter point doesn't mean anything. What you need is, the market rate. And the market rate may be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. People ask me, well, if you were there, what would you make it? Well, I don't know what to make it, but I would let the market decide it instead of the pretense. Hayek talked about the pretense of knowledge, that we know things that we can't possibly know. And if you get overly rigid and you start regulating too much, then you have very distorted economies and you have more poverty, and the extreme socialist economies and the total prices control, people end up very poor. Well, we see this in Zimbabwe and Venezuela, and that is too much control. I'm a strong believer, as you know, in the marketplace, and the market is smarter than a bunch of bureaucrats who only serve the special interests. That's the big problem. We give all this power to a few people, and lo and behold, guess who got all the bailouts in the last go-around? The big corporations and the big banks. So it just invites problems.
Ron, what would happen to prevent your forecast? How can we prevent your dire forecast?
No, you can't prevent it because the correction and the collapse and getting rid of the bubbles has been built into the system. It's been going on for 10 years, so it's there. You can't stop it. You can change it. what government does is they might try to modify it by just printing a lot more money and running up more debt, which we did in 08 and 09, and that tended to tide us over, but it made a bigger and bigger bubble. Each time you have to make it much, much bigger, because we don't liquidate the debt and all the mistakes made by this false information of fake interest rates. In 1921, we had a very, very bad depression. It lasted 1 year, because back then they hadn't inherited or formed these ideas that governments have to do something. People don't like to have recessions, and politically, nobody wants it. And now, because of the huge bubble we have, and everybody dependent on this, politically, it will never be solved gracefully. You could do it. You could balance the budget and cut the spending and cut back on the printing of money, but it's not going to happen. So they'll continue to do it. And today is a pretty good example of what they're trying to do. Everybody anticipates what the Fed's going to do. Oh, they moved a quarter point. What is it going to do? Well, 1 minute it made the market go up 200 points. The next minute it was down 300 points, because there's no soundness, no measurement, and this is to be expected. But the final conclusion of this will come in a sort of a panic fashion, and that could come next week or next month or next year. But it will come, and unfortunately, the question you have is a good one, because we would like to avoid a calamity. But since politically it's unacceptable, because this would affect everybody, it would affect the military-industrial complex, our military, and everything else. But you say, see, we can't let that happen. But if you continue, it's going to happen anyway. So we ought to know exactly what causes this so we can make the correction.